Hi guys, this is a video to accompany the cycle of fifths worksheet here, so please follow along on that. I'll also note that I'm also including a recording of just like the MIDI playback of this worksheet so that you can hear all of these chord progressions. So please do that. Going through listening to these chords, it's really important that you hear how they sound. If at all possible, if you have access to a keyboard, then I really encourage you to play these things on the piano as well, as slowly as you need. I understand that might not be possible for everyone, so the audio is the next best thing, just to listen through, follow along, pay attention to this voice leading and to these chord progressions. So there's a lot of information on here, so please go through it carefully, reading all of the numbered points here that I make. It's really going to help. But the first thing here, part A on the first page, I'll just go over what we have here. So on the very top line, this descending fifths progression in major. This is really familiar to us. This is, as we know, the basis for all of these predominant, dominant, diatonic harmonies that we have, right? This descending fifth progression, very strong. And the second line here, we just are adding sevenths. We're adding diatonic sevenths, right? So notice we're in A major and there are no accidentals, right? So everything just as you find it in the key. Notice here the voice leading. So each seventh is set up by the third of the previous chord. This is going to be important. Basically, what we see is that sevenths in one chord become thirds in the chord immediately followed, right? So the next chord, the seventh becomes the third, and the third becomes the seventh of the next chord. And so you can see with the dotted lines where the seventh moves, so the third moves to the seventh, right? So those are pointed out. Those are common tones when we have this diatonic progression. And so next, down here, we are adding the chromatic inflection. So basically, we're adding leading tones here, secondary leading tones, and only on chords that we can. So notice here, this 4 chord, we can't turn into a secondary dominant in this case to resolve to the 7th chord, because notice here, this leading tone chord in this 3rd spot, right? We cannot tonicize that. So go over those rules again. Remember, we can't tonicize diminished triads, right? And so that one remains diatonic. All the rest of these, though, these 3 measures, the last 3, all are just a chain of secondary dominants, right? Until we get to the true dominant chord here at the last measure. So notice that the voice leading is borrowed from the diatonic version of this chord progression. So in other words, the third of one chord becomes the 7th of the next, and vice versa. So here you can see the soprano and the C sharp 7 chord, this E sharp, that's the third of C sharp 7, and it moves down. So that's showed here with all these arrows, moves down to E natural. Cool. There is one thing that is really unique here. This is sort of the most important thing about this that we understand, is that what is the leading tone, because it's going to become the 7th of the next chord, it's actually not going to resolve up. Aha, right? So this leading tone, this is our secondary leading tone, right? This third, the E sharp. E sharp is the leading tone of F sharp, right? The next chord. But in this specific chord progression, it has to become the 7th of the next chord. So it has to resolve down to this E, right? So that is the crux of this entire worksheet here, this entire little mini unit. And likewise, we get, of course, the 7th. So in the C#7 chord, for example, the B, that's still going to resolve down. So remember when I said probably a month ago at this point that there's never any exception to the rule that sevenths resolve down by step? That is very true. There are some exceptions, and this is another one where the leading tone does not actually resolve up the way that we expect it to. In this case, it has to resolve down. So that's the most important thing here. Just very quickly onto the second page, marked B. This is the same exact thing in minor. And so I'm not going to go over all of it here for you. I'd like you to do that on your own. The same exact rules apply. The only thing I'll point out to make sure that we're on the same page about is that this 6th chord is the chord that we cannot turn into a secondary dominant chord, because in minor, remember, the 2 chord is diminished and we cannot tonicize that 2 chord. So the chord right before the 2 diminished chord can't be turned into a secondary dominant. So it's the only one that has to remain the same. But we get all these other chords that we can add leading tones to, that we can raise. Basically, we're raising the 3rd or lowering the 7th, right, to turn them into a dominant 7th chord. Great, and so go over that one as well on your own. And now there's one more page here, and this is the fully chromatic chain of secondary dominants. So this is kind of cool. We don't even need to think about this being in a specific key. And you'll notice that on this page, on this 3rd page, there are no Roman numerals because they kind of become useless at this point. All we're thinking about is every single chord acting like a 5/7 chord, right? But the thing is, it resolves to a chord that's also going to act like a 5/7 chord. And so what you end up with, if you're looking at this top system here on the 3rd page, what you end up with is this really, really continuous chord progression of 5/7. So G7, C7, F7. Notice that we're going around C, right? C, F, B flat, E, A flat, D flat, going around the circle of fifths counterclockwise, right? And every single chord is going to be a 5/7, a secondary dominant. Now here in this measure, we have to switch. We have to switch spelling with flats to spelling with sharps once we get near this bottom of the circle of fifths. And so you can choose, and composers can choose when that happens. So that's what this is about. It's just showing you a couple of options there about when you might switch. The same thing in terms of voice leading applies here as well. So remember that 7ths still always resolve down by half step, and they resolve to the 3rd of the next chord, and the 3rd of whatever chord we're on is going to resolve down also by half step to become the 7th of the next chord. And so what you end up with is this really continuous chain of tritones, right? Remember, that's the interval between the 3rd and the 7th of a 5/7 chord that makes it really dissonant. That's the thing that needs to resolve. So in this voicing, to make it really clear, we have that tritone here in the top 2 voices. And so you can see that B to F is a tritone. It resolves down to B flat and E, down to A and E flat, right? These are every single one of these on the top staff here, the top 2 voices is a tritone until I resolve it to a triad, right? And then you see that the tritone resolves the way that we expect once we break this chain, once we've gone all the way around. Awesome. And so that is the fully chromatic chain of secondary dominants. At the bottom of this page, marked D, and the 3rd page, you see it's the same exact chord progression, but there are a couple of different inversions that we can use, a couple of different patterns of inversions. So this one we can alternate 6/5 to 4/2. Here we can alternate 4/3 and a root position 7. So this is just two examples of that. Go through and check them out. The voice leading works exactly the same way in all three of these progressions on the third page, which again is borrowed from the previous two. So the version in major and the version in minor. Notice since this fully chromatic version doesn't really have a key, it doesn't matter if we're in major or minor. We're just sort of thinking abstractly. That's why the lead sheet symbols are really going to be helpful. You can sort of end it at any point, and any of these chords, if you want to stop the progression, you could resolve any single one of these chords to a major or a minor triad, right? So this D7, where we end it, resolves to a G triad. It could just as easily resolve to a G minor triad, right? And then we would say, oh, it sounds like we're in G minor, right? 5 to 1 in G minor, because remember the dominant chord is the same, whether we're in major or in minor. 5/7 is a 5/7. That's what makes this chord sort of the backbone of so much music. Okay, so hopefully this was helpful. Really spend some time with this worksheet and make sure to listen. That's really important, to listen to these things. And let me know in the forum if you have any questions. It was good to see you guys today on our video chat. And yeah, let me know if you have questions. Thanks, guys.